Welcome to Smash Avro Property. Today I'm speaking with Jack Henderson. He's a 23-year-old with a $4 million property portfolio. He walks us through his story, starting with getting expelled from high school at 15 through to buying his first property, and what his future goals are before he turns 30. We also delve into how important asset selection is going to be in the coming years due to automation and technology disrupting industries, and how there may be a shift in the types of areas that have the most demand for property.
My thought process behind it is if there is no income growth, which there is going to be, it's going to keep declining and declining, and jobs are being taken from automation and artificial intelligence. Essentially, the people, where these people live and invest are generally blue and white collar working areas.
Yeah.
And if you're investing in these areas, essentially, these people they're not able to make any more money and increase their serviceability. How are they going to be able to pay more for property?
As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. So without any further ado, let's get house hunting with Jack. Jack Henderson, welcome to Smash Over Property.
Mate, thank you very much for having me on.
We were just talking pre-podcast, and it sounds like you've been on about 30 different other podcasts. So it's a big pleasure of mine to get you on and have you on this one.
Awesome, mate. I'm looking forward to sharing my story, and hopefully some people can get some gold out of what I've done.
Yeah, no, it should be good, mate. I'm keen to get into it. So to get us started, why don't you talk us through how old you are, what you're currently up to for work, what sort of education you've got, and your story so far.
Yeah, mate. So I'm 23 years old. At the moment I've just sort of transitioned out of, I guess, the career I've been in for the past 7 or 8 years, which is in the construction and mining industry. And I've just transitioned into the property industry, funny enough. So I now head an investment division for a business called Trulleys Associates, who's a property acquisitions firm in Sydney. And mate, that's all come about from obviously me, starting investing when I was 15 and building my portfolio to where I am now and sharing my story and inspiring a lot of people. And I guess that's how I've gotten to where I am. As for education, I'm I guess probably one of the most uneducated people there is. I never finished high school. I've never been to TAFE. I guess the only qualification I probably have is my real estate license.
Yeah,
So
right.
education, mate, I'm pretty bland in the education department.
That's great. So what were you doing in the construction and mining industry?
So mate, when I left school, I got expelled from school actually.
Nice.
I was sort of 15, didn't have a license, and obviously options are pretty limited in terms of not being able to, get transport to and from different jobs. So the only option I had was to work for my father, and he happened to work in the construction industry.
Yeah.
So I was going to work with him every day, obviously starting off as a labourer and then progressing through into an operator and then moving from, I guess, civil construction into, mining over the last couple of years. And that's where I sort of finished up at the end of 2019.
Gosh.
And that's taken me to this career path.
And so what do you say to all the teachers that said you'd never amount to anything now?
Look, mate, I guess I never really had that story. It was funny. I wasn't the greatest student in terms of wanting to be there. Obviously, I didn't want to be at school, so I didn't really apply myself, and distracting other students is sort of frowned upon.
Yeah.
But every time I had a conversation with a teacher, or they had brought the parents up to the office and had a chat with them because I was doing something wrong, it was never the, I guess, stereotypical "you'll never amount to nothing." I never said that.
Yeah.
I guess a lot of people say that stuff because it creates a cool story to say, look what people have said and look what I've done now. But they never said that about me. They always said, look, Jack, we think you're going to be quite successful in whatever you do.
Yeah.
And we can see school is not for you. So I guess I could lie and say that they always said I was never going to be anything. But I never had a teacher actually say you're going to be a drop kick.
That's good. At least they
that.
supported you, though. You know what I mean? At least they didn't say you were going to do nothing, but they had faith in you.
Exactly. Look, I was very academic at school. Like I was very smart, and I guess I didn't really apply myself at all. So I really could have been quite academic at school if I applied myself even more so. I probably would have done exceptionally well. But I knew from a very young age that listening to a teacher who's earning $75,000 a year and in a job for life tell me how to be successful in life really wasn't the path I wanted to move in. So yeah, that didn't it didn't go too down too
Yeah,
well with the teachers.
our education system is something else, and I could talk to you about it for hours. But anyway, and I think that's kind of the best part about that story. Not that you haven't been told you'd amount to nothing, but there's quite a commonality between younger people that are quite successful. It's not that they've had a tough upbringing or they haven't done well in their early ages, but it sounds like you've kind of had to snap into action pretty young. And as you say, you saw a teacher who was only earning 75K a year, and you thought, I don't really want that for my life. There's obviously something more that I can achieve. And I think that's quite a commonality between you know most of the young people who are successful. They haven't sort of been gone down that path of, oh, you have to finish high school, or you have to finish university, or you have to get a full-time job, and then by that time they're 24, 25 and start to go, okay, now I need to get a house.
Absolutely. Look, I think the thing with education is, um, the thing I'm hearing more and more and more, and it's becoming a big and bigger topic in the Western world, is we take our education massively for granted. Look, I don't agree with, it's not for everyone going through the school system and going to university and all the rest of it. But in parts of the world, in the poorer parts of the world, education to those people is something that can get them out of poverty,
Mm,
because they're not, they're not sort of exposed to the education we're exposed to and we take for granted.
mm,
So as much as I do say, like, yeah, it's university and going all the way through school is not for everyone, you can be successful without it, I still believe we have to realize how privileged we are to have an education system like we do, and to
yeah,
actually have the choice to go, you know what, I don't want to go to school, I'm going to go do something else. Because there's probably more than half the world, which people don't realize, that don't get that choice. They, they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old,
yeah,
and they're forced to go work on a farm for the rest of their life, and they would do anything to have the opportunity we have to learn.
yeah,
So I just think it's, I guess it's realizing and being very self-aware in terms of, um, your plus and strengths. A lot of people go through school and they get to year 12, and the only reason they go to university is because they have no idea what they want to do.
yeah, correct.
And then they get through whatever they did in university and realize, I didn't want to do this. It's not
Yeah,
what I see myself doing at all, and they just take a completely different path. So yeah, that's sort of how I feel about the education system. I think a lot of people put shit on it, and a lot of people bag it, and there's a lot of, I guess, people talking wrongly about something that we should really be grateful for, I think.
yeah. No, that's a great outlook to have on it, considering the story that you have as well. It's easy for a lot of people your age to say, hey, I dropped out, look at me, look at how successful I am. But even from this first 5 minutes, having that gratitude to say, oh no, I was never told I was amounted to anything. And we should be respectful of the education system that we have. And look at all the other people that don't have the opportunity. It sounds like you've got a real grounded view on the system itself. So good on you, mate.
Yeah, I do. I do. And I think, the more I'm seeing it, it's becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger topic, and everyone's got their opinion on, what the education system should be like and how we should structure it and all the rest of it. But I think we should really just start from the ground up, saying we actually have an education system, and it's
Yeah,
a very good education system, because look, the world that we have right now has been built from people who have been educated through that system. So it's
yeah,
not like it hasn't done its right, but obviously moving forward into the new, millennial like we are, there's going to be a little bit of change. So
yeah, for sure. And if we put someone else in charge and said, okay, you've got to now wipe the slate clean and start a new education system, how you'd like to do it, I'm sure even 70, 80% of the things that we currently learn would still be in there. It would just be the only 20 or 10% of the things that people would change. So it,
exactly,
you can't just put stuff against it and say, no, it's no good, restart, when as you say, the world we live in has been built on it. So there's obviously
exactly,
it's something that they're doing right.
exactly right. That's exactly how I feel.
Anyway, so this is a property podcast. We should get onto property.
Yeah, we've gone straight into education. Don't worry about it.
So firstly, I mean, what got you into the property game? You said that you started at 15 years of age there, but was it something that was quite talked about at home, or was there a video, or a magazine or something that got you into it?
Yeah, look, I like I said, obviously getting expelled from school. I went and worked from sort of 15 years old, which is quite young. And I guess at that age, you have nothing really to spend money on. The
Mm,
majority of 15-year-olds are still having their lifestyle and worlds funded by their parents, which is pretty normal. Um, and you don't own a car and you don't really buy a great deal of stuff. And I was earning really good money, right? So from 15 to sort of 17-ish, I saved a lot of money, had nothing to spend it on.
yeah.
And then it got to that age where, look, you're just about to move into being a young adult, essentially becoming 18. You've got all this money, and there was just I guess, the natural stigma of just you should buy your own home.
Mm,
Like my parents had bought investment properties in the past. Look, then my parents aren't super wealthy, and the investment properties they bought, didn't really do really well. But I
mm,
guess I was around it in the matter of that I knew what investment properties were, and I knew that you should purchase your own property. And obviously, I had the money to do it. And the conversation was around, look, you're 17, 18 years old. You've got the money to do it. You don't need to buy anything else. You're still living at home. Go and buy your first home.
mm,
So that was the conversation, and that's how it sort of happened. So I guess the first property that I purchased wasn't necessarily an investment. I never had this, audacious goal of having this huge portfolio and the lifestyle and all the rest of it. It was just go and buy your first home, which is what I did.
mm.
So I guess from when I essentially made the decision that I was going to buy a home, so that was sort of from 17, from 17 to sort of 18 and a bit when I actually purchased, it was just getting like immersed, I guess, in what to buy, how to buy it, where to buy it, and all the ins and outs of essentially what goes into a property purchase.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess on that journey of education, I come by a guy by the name of Chris Gray. I'm not sure if you've seen
Yeah.
or heard of him before. And his story really resonated with me in the terms of, I was a young kid, boats and Lamborghinis and flying first class, and the lifestyle he had was,
Yeah.
quite attractive to someone who doesn't come from that life.
Yeah. And only
So I
17
got
year old in general.
exactly right. Like it's pretty sexy. So I guess I got attached to his strategy. And then the more research I'd done, the more I'd seen that the more most affluent and wealthy people in the world use this strategy, and
Yeah.
I guess use all of these, wealth accumulation processes and all the rest of it. So I started attending seminars, and then I met him face to face, and then obviously got connected on social media. And Chris actually become a mentor to me,
Yeah.
which I
Wow.
was very very lucky and very grateful for, which is I guess how I got started. Then he mentored me through that first property purchase, and I guess to where I am essentially now. It's just sort of grown from that initial, having that initial mentor, and then that opened up an unbelievable network to people that I now call friends and acquaintances and business partners and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's crazy. And just for clarification, I mean, where are you now and how is your property portfolio?
Look, so I guess I bought the first one at 18. I'm now 23. I've got almost 4 million in property, which
Mm,
is over three separate proproperties. So I'm not the
nice.
type of person. We actually had this conversation before we jumped on the podcast. I'm not the type of person that you know thinks it's sexy to have 10 or 20 or 30 properties.
Yeah.
To me, it's very much net assets,
Mm,
and on top of net assets, the quality of those assets.
mm.
Um, so look, that's where I stand now. I've got just under 4 mil. It looks like it's going to be another cracking year in Sydney. So hopefully by the end of next year, the value will be a little bit over 4.
Yeah.
Um, and it's split between 3 different properties.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Well, I was actually the last guest that I had on was Chris Bates, and he's a mortgage broker, and
Yeah, I know Chris well.
he was saying the same thing. Like, and I listen to his podcast all the time, so I'm a big advocate of what he preaches. But often the people with 10 or 20 properties are the ones that are worse off because they've got if they're in the same case as you, they had 4 million in property, but they had that spread across 20 properties. That's each property is worth $200,000 each. And then, you got to manage all these properties. You got to keep on top of all these properties. You're going to have issues with all these properties, and you're going to have, you're much better off having 3 really good tenants in 3 properties worth $4 million than 20 half average tenants in 20 properties worth $4 million.
Exactly. And look, I guess there's a strategy for everyone, right? Um, and everyone's life path is different, and the way they accumulate their wealth is different.
Mm,
Um, and I guess all we see through social media and magazines and all the rest of it is face value. You see
mm,
that so and so has X amount of properties worth X amount of dollars, and I guess that's what you have to take it at face value. So I know from my experience and the people that I have come across through what I do, and people I talk to on a daily basis. Um, I see regularly that all of these properties that essentially look very sexy, from the 20 properties and the 10 properties with X amount of dollars, are
mm.
the types of people that send me a breakdown of the portfolio and say, how can you help me? Because it's not as good as it really looks.
Yeah, for sure, and it's all about that headline too. You know what I mean? Like this guy bought 6 properties this year. You know what I mean? And that, of
Exactly.
course, it's going to get clicks and attention and everything else, and people want to hear all about it. And little do they know that he's bought really 6 C class assets that aren't going to do the best over the next 10 years, and he's going to be at his borrowing capacity for the next 10 years, and not going to be able to renting his principal place of residence, and so he's just sort of stuck in this web.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess moving on from the properties and like what we're just talking about with the asset quality, from now on moving into the future, I think now more than ever, asset quality is something that is very, very, very important,
Mm,
because over the past sort of however long, 30, 40, 50 years, it sort of hasn't really mattered where you've bought property. You've sort of Most people have done okay, right?
mm,
Unless you bought in a mining town or something like that. Because the world has been completely different,
mm,
like moving forwards, income growth at the moment is at the lowest it has ever been at in this country
yeah,
and worldwide. It's the hardest it's ever been to get money from the banks. And obviously with automation and artificial intelligence moving into our ecosystems like they are at a very, very rapid pace, my thought process behind it is, if there is no income growth, which there is going to be, it's going to keep declining and declining, and jobs are being taken from automation and artificial intelligence.
hmm,
Essentially, the people, well, where these people live and invest are generally blue and white collar working areas.
yeah,
And if you're investing in these areas, essentially, these people aren't, they're not able to make any more money and increase their serviceability. How are they going to be able to pay more for property, which
yeah,
essentially makes property prices increase? So my thought process is, moving forward, I think being close to affluence and being close to people who control their own incomes is more important than it ever has been,
yeah,
because we've never had a world like we've had now. We've gone through different, cycles of the world changing, but it's never been a technology world where jobs are being replaced with I guess, automation and artificial intelligence.
yeah.
So it's something I'm thinking about a lot, and I'm seeing a lot of people buying into these affordable areas, and they're doing really, really well in the short term. But I can't help but think, how's this going to look in 10 years time?
Yeah, for sure. I'm on the same wavelength, but for me, it's more about I'm got the ability to work remotely, so I could go on holidays up to the Mornington Peninsula for 7 days and work 9 to 5 from the place that we're on holidays during while I'm there, and so if you put that on into context, and then you go, oh, well, actually, I could buy a house out here and still work remotely and have that sort of beach lifestyle, then that's a possibility as well. So it's not that we're so bound to being in our CBDs and having to rock up to an office every single day as well. I think now it's becoming much more flexible, and it's some businesses even prefer it, you know what I mean, for them not to have to pay for an office space and internet and everything else that goes along with it, for you to be in that one central hub. If you can work efficiently at home and do the same job but be able to do it remotely, maybe there's not going to have to be this sort of density around our CBDs.
Yeah, I think there's it's definitely going to be interesting to see how, I guess, things pan out and how things change moving into the future, for sure.
And it's going to be an interesting. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's this new sort of population government or treasury or whatever that they've put together that is now predicting, what our population growth is going to be over the years. So it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of mixes in with, this remote work and AI and jobs and all that being replaced. If wage growth is staying at the same levels it is currently, like where are these people going to buy? And if we're going to have that many people come into the country, specifically Melbourne and Sydney predominantly, where are they going to live, and what sort of demand for housing is there going to be, and what types of housing?
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
So, I mean, your story initially really was about saving money rather than, you didn't have property in mind and say, okay, I'm going to be saving, $100,000 for a deposit for my first property. It was more just extra cash on the side. I mean, was there a reason that you were saving for money specifically?
Well, I guess, look, saving money is obviously better than spending it.
Yeah.
But look, I was a young kid, and like I said, there's nothing to spend money on. Like when you really think about it, when you're 15 years old, what do you have? Got an
Yeah.
Xbox, a couple of clothes, you go to the movies with your friends. Like if you think logically about it, you don't really have a lot to spend money on. And
Yeah.
to put it into context, like I was 15 years old, earning 80 grand a year. Like
Right.
like
It's pretty
you do the
crazy.
numbers on that.
But
There's
in saying that though, I mean, you could have gone out and bought an $80,000 car.
I could have, but I didn't even have a license at 15. And I still and
No, when you got one.
I still went and I still went and bought a nice car
Yeah, right.
when I got my license. But look, there just wasn't a lot to spend money on. And like I said, I was living at home. I didn't pay for food.
Yeah,
Like I
right.
was just a normal 15-year-old kid. Where most of these 15-year-old kids were in school, obviously going to school every day and going home and having their lunch packed for them and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
I just happened to spend my 8 to 10 or 12 hours, whatever it is, at work and not at school. And as a reward of going to work, you get paid, obviously. So there
yeah,
was never like this big audacious savings goal. It just like sort of started, and you know, week two you have more than you had in week one, and then week 10 you have more than you have in week two, and it just
yeah,
slowly accumulates, especially over a couple of years. Where like if you say to someone right now, go and save, like say I'm 23, if someone was going to tell me, okay, Jack, go and save for the next 3 years and don't touch it,
yeah,
it's a lot harder
yeah,
because there's girls and there's partying and there's travel and there's like there's all these other things that deviate you off your path
yeah,
essentially.
yeah.
So I was sort of, it was a blessing in disguise that I was that young and I was earning that sort of money.
Yeah. So for that first purchase, did you kind of buy where you were living, or was it for
No,
a
so
okay.
yeah. So the first purchase, so I saved um, a six-figure sum, um, and then obviously, like I said, I met Chris Gray and he sort of mentored me through it. So I ended up buying. I lived in northwest Sydney in a
Hmm.
suburb called Wilberforce, which is just a blue collar working suburb on the river.
Yep.
And I ended up buying a two-bedroom apartment in Coogee, which is in the eastern suburbs, on
Yeah.
the
Wow.
beaches,
Yep.
which very in line with Chris's, I guess, strategy and how we purchased. So
Yeah, I was going to
that
say
was
that.
what sort of drove me to that sort of property and that purchase, yeah, for sure.
And then did he put you on sort of a plan for the second and third one at that point, or have you just sort of grown from there?
Yeah, not really. It was just sort of like this is what he'd recommend purchasing. And from the research I'd done, I thought, yeah, all the numbers stack up. And if I'm going to
Yeah.
listen to someone, it's going to be someone with his sort of expertise and portfolio. And then from the first one, it was just like I just got obsessed. Like I bought the first one, the feeling's incredible, and then from there, obviously, the horizon just opened for me and grew. And I thought, like, there's uncapped potential here, essentially.
Yeah.
And I bought in a time where Sydney was experiencing extremely good growth.
Wow.
So another thing, I guess, opportunity and taking action just sort of met in one place, and it was incredible. So from that one, I bought that at 18. I bought the next one just before I turned 20, which again I was still living at home, saving a lot of money. My income had obviously increased in that time as well.
Yeah.
Plus the property growth that we had over that 2 year period
Yeah. For sure.
was massive. So then I obviously refinanced the Coogee property, used some savings, and then bought another two-bedroom apartment in Maroubra, which
Oh,
is the
nice.
next beach suburb down from Coogee. Um,
Yeah.
and
That's
then 2 years later, I bought another one using exactly the same strategy. but I bought it in Newcastle in a suburb called Bar Beach, which is essentially the Bondi Beach of Newcastle.
Yeah.
Median house price of above $2 million, apartment price of 500 to 600. So I essentially just cloned that strategy and then went and put it into another suburb that wasn't necessarily in Sydney.
Yeah, that's cool. And were you predominantly, I mean, most people focus on, high cash flow or capital growth. Was there one specifically that you were looking for?
Look, cash flow to me is, I guess, the biggest misconception when it comes to real estate.
Mm,
Unless you have, I guess, a massive asset base that is, you have a lot of capital in, cash flow means nothing. Like,
yeah.
not one thing. You can have 10 properties. I don't know how you're going to get the 10 properties. Let's just say you have 10 properties and they all bring you $200 a week. Like, that's $100,000. You then pay 40 cents in the dollar tax. It's down to 60. You then got your expenses for the properties. Like, the picture people paint of this passive income,
Yeah.
it's not real.
Yeah.
Like, when you actually do the numbers, you put your 1.5% for expenses in, you pay your tax. You then, because you generally buy in positive cash flow properties in suburbs that are lower socioeconomic, they've got higher vacancy rates. So you factor all that in. Positive cash flow is not a viable strategy. And
Yeah.
I don't know too many people that I've spoken to, and I've spoken to a lot of people that they've gone from day one, and that's the strategy they've done, and now they're sitting there 20 years later, and they're sitting there on a $200,000 passive income. It's not real.
Yeah.
So I guess the only thing you have to think about is this property going to grow in the next 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, however long you think you're going to invest for? And of course, you have to still be able to manage that in your budget. You can't have a property costing you $300 or $400 a week
Yeah.
when essentially you don't have that much surplus cash. So it's about having something that's balanced. And look, with the low interest rates economy we're in now, you can buy in the most blue chip areas in Sydney, and you get a 2.5 or 3% yield. Your interest rate's only 3.5, 4%. So essentially, you're really only 1% negative anyway. It's
Yeah.
a small amount of money.
Yeah.
Like, people just paint this picture that it's not real.
Well, this is one of the biggest things that Chris was worried about 2020 is virtually everything's going to be positively cash flowed, and there's going to be so many spruikers out there trying to sell, brand new properties on this aim of generating cash flow every month from your rental income, and little do people know that it's actually chewing away their borrowing capacity from buying this stuff, and then they get sold on this property investment journey, and then 5 years later, when they decide to have a kid and they can't buy their own personal place of residence, they're stuck.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, the property industry, because it seems to be the businesses that do the best. Essentially, I think their clients are probably doing the worst.
Mm,
Um, because like you said, they paint this picture and sell this pipe dream to people. And obviously, the majority of people hate working every day, and passive income to the majority of people sounds like an incredible thing. And if they think, if I can replace my income in 10 years' time, and essentially they all want freedom, it's incredible. And that's where they buy into it. But like, then you go back and actually talk to these people and be like, oh, okay, so you started this journey 12 years ago. How's it going now? And 99% of the time they say, it didn't really work out the way I thought it was going to.
yep.
And that's
Yep.
the thing. And that's why there's such a bad stigma in our industry, because so many people have been, done wrong by.
Yeah.
So
And when we're talking about, $500,000, $1 million purchases, it's, you can't get it wrong. You know what I mean? You get one wrong, you get two wrong. Then you're stuck and you have to sell them. And sometimes, most of the time, you lose money too, And I think,
exactly.
that's what I've been surrounded by my whole life is, so you can't lose in property, but going through this whole journey of educating myself around it, it's much more common than you'd think.
More people lose in property than people win, I can assure you that. And it's
Yeah.
so funny that people generally win in property with their own home. People do super, like, everyone. There's the thing around it that your own residence is a liability, not an asset. Sure, on paper it is, but if you look at 99% of Australians and however many millionaires in Australians are made by property, the majority of these people have made money through their owner occupied property. There isn't many people that have actually made money through investing. And
Mm,
the reason for that is because the criteria and the thought process they use when buying their owner occupied home is very emotional. And sure, they may overpay for a property, but they actually think about things logically. Why people want to live here? Why do we want to live here? Well, we want to be close to these schools. We want to be close to this, blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
So it's a very emotional purchase. And essentially, if they want to live there, 9 times out of 10, people who are similar to they are want to live there too. So they generally do quite well with their owner occupier home. But then when it comes to investing, all of a sudden the logical thought process goes out the window, and they just get, I guess, sucked into this. Buy this property because it's positive cash flow, and they don't even think about it. They just think, oh, it's $50 a week in my pocket, and then then stack on top of that now how incredibly hard it is to get money out of the banks. And I don't care how positive cash flow your property is. You could have a 10% yield property, and you can only borrow $600,000. You can buy $200,000-$300,000 properties at a 10% yield, which doesn't exist anyway, and you can't borrow any more. So there's no such thing as passive income.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist anymore. If you can only borrow X amount of dollars, that's the only passive income you can have. And if you don't increase your income, you can't buy any more. And if those properties don't grow, that passive income you have is all you're going to have.
Yeah, exactly. And when we talk about passive income compared to capital growth, like if you're making 5,000 a year off one property, good on you, but then you got tax and everything else, as you said before, on top of it. But you could be making 30, 40, 50 grand a year off capital growth of a property. So it doesn't really compare.
And it only increases over time. Exactly. With the
compound
compounding
growth
effect. It's very, very funny. And I feel I genuinely feel sorry for a lot of people, because a lot of these people are mum and dads, and all they want to do is better their financial future, and they put their trust and, I guess, livelihoods in the hands of other people. And it happened to my parents. They got sucked into it too. They bought 2 off the plan properties, spruiked to them, I guess, sexily sold to them, flown on planes down to Victoria and up to Queensland, and promised the world, and essentially by their accountant. And he got a massive kickback from the developer. And 10 years time, he's disappeared, and the properties have gone backwards. And for some numbers, they paid $350,000 for an apartment in southeast Queensland, which seems to be a hotspot at the moment, right? Yeah. Queensland's going to, from what I'm hearing for the past 5 years, Queensland's going to be the next hot thing. And essentially, they sold it 11 years later for $330,000. So on top of the actual capital loss, they had all of the opportunity costs, all of the holding costs, and then the emotional stress on top of that. And then when you sell the property, you think like, what have I done? Like, I just spent 11 years of my life, and I was promised that 11 years this property is going to be worth 800 grand, and it's worth X. Like, it's just the most disheartening thing in the world.
Yeah.
And I can see that happening to a lot of people.
That's crazy. I'm glad you've taken, two extremes. You're a young guy who's invested well, and then shown sort of the lessons that you not only learnt from Chris Gray, but obviously from your parents too. They've shown you what not to do, I guess.
Exactly. And look, they've actually done quite well in property, but like I just said, they've done really, really well through buying owner-occupier homes.
Yeah.
And that's just from progressing through life. You buy, a small home when you're just a couple and you have kids, and it keeps expanding. And essentially when your income increases, you want to buy into better areas. And that's how I see a lot of people, and especially a lot of their friends and older people. That's how they've done really well. And they're sitting on millions of dollars worth of equity, but none of it's from investing. It's all from just buying their own homes and doing their own renovations and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to be an interesting one to ask you about. A lot of people sort of want to go on this property investment journey and retire by 50 off the passive income and all that sort of stuff. But taking everything that you've learned into consideration, do you have sort of a goal for property investing? I mean, where's the end goal for you?
For myself?
Yeah.
I want 10 million net assets by 30.
Nice.
And look, I earned a very large salary when I was in the mines, and I was capped at what I could borrow. Like, the last property I purchased was an absolute mountain to get over. Like, it was very, very hard to get the serviceability to work.
Yeah.
So when I come out the back end of that property, that's what got me thinking, like, okay, if I want to continue this, I have to be able to increase my income.
Yeah.
Which essentially, now being in the industry and the position I am now, income's really untapped. But yeah. I know to get to 10 million in property, I'm going to have to increase my income massively, like huge. Yeah. So it's just going to be a journey. And if look, I think I'm going to achieve it. I'm pretty confident I will achieve it because essentially I've got four now. Four turns to, I don't know, sort of seven or eight
Yeah.
by 30. I've only got to really add one or two more properties, or one
Yeah.
or two more $1 million worth of property to it over the next sort of 5 or so years, which is achievable. But for a passive income thing, I guess I plan to, like, property's not my only thing I enjoy doing. I want to build a business. So I guess my income will come from my business,
Yeah.
and I guess property's just an asset to hold capital essentially.
Yeah.
And look,
And
that you go through different stages in life where you may pay down some debt, but I just the whole thing in the world is tax. Like, tax is the biggest thing that takes the most amount of money away from us. So I think if it doesn't get any harder with lending, um, if you've got the cash flow from a business or from your high paying job, essentially refinancing your portfolio and just pulling equity in low interest rate environments
mm,
and using equity for lifestyle and
mm,
holidays and cars and boats and all the rest of it, because money is so cheap and I can't see it going anywhere. So that's sort of my plan. It's just to have the assets there, and essentially that's just money to enjoy my life, and then to fund day to day expenses will be done through a business, and
yeah.
from me actually working, not I just do not believe in a passive income
Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. That's a great
world.
takeaway.
Yeah,
And even, a lot of people say they want to get to, 10 properties or 5 properties or whatever, and then sell two off to live off the passive income of the rest of them. But to me, it sounds like, you just want to have that security of the 10 million in assets, and then obviously start your business and enjoy your, how can you possibly think about retirement at 23, especially someone like you who's, been proactively following and chasing a career since you were 15. You don't really have that sort of retirement vision in plan, and
there's
really you're at that position now where you can determine what you want to do with your life. So if you want to start your own business and run your day-to-day life like that, sounds like a great way to do so.
exactly. And look, I don't believe in retirement either. In terms, like, retirement, I believe is for people who hate what they do on a day to day basis, right? I
Yeah.
think you only want to retire and not do something when you don't enjoy it. So I plan to live a life that is very fulfilling, and I do what I want to do. So there should be no need for me to say I don't want to work anymore, because
Yeah.
work is just part of your day to day life.
Yeah,
So
for sure. That's a great takeaway.
that's how I see things. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I love that because it's so easy for our generation to sort of get caught up in this cycle, in this rat race, and not understand that life is what you make it, and you can do what you want to do every single day of your life.
exactly. And it's becoming more and more easy to do that. Like, obviously, when our parents were growing up, it was completely different, and it wasn't. You couldn't just have a side hustle or start a business, because
Mm.
it wasn't like it is now. With the internet and social media, I guess anything's possible.
Yeah, exactly. So for the next two property, or one or two properties, depending on how your portfolio goes, I mean, what do you look for in the investment potential of a property?
So I guess I have a pretty strict criteria. Um, like I said earlier, it's being as close as possible to affluence and wealth. Affluence and wealth tend to be, closer to CBDs. Um, I the two biggest things is owner occupier appeal, because owner occupiers are people, obviously, I was saying, buy with emotion, which is what drives prices, and scarcity. So why is your property worth more than, I guess, the one next door or the one down the road? Um, so it's pretty. I guess I have a strict criteria, but it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. It's owner occupier appeal. There has to be some sort of scarcity to it, as close to affluence and wealth as possible, which is, like I said, close to CBDs, in an area with very limited supply and very high demand. Um, and look, in Sydney, that tends to be two-bedroom apartments in the eastern beaches.
Mm.
Different parts of, I guess, in Melbourne, you can use exactly the same strategy, but it's probably not necessarily apartments. It could be little, Victorians or little houses, essentially. But look, it's essentially just using that structure and criteria, and then you can essentially take it anywhere if it fits. So in Newcastle, the areas that I'll probably buy another property up here. The areas I'm in Merewether, Bar Beach, Cooks Hill, there's homes. I'm sitting in my apartment now next to a home that's worth $7 million. So it's very, very, I guess, it proofs in the pudding that there is affluence and wealth here. If there's property worth $7 million, and I've got $1 million apartment sitting next to it,
Yeah.
that, it's if that's worth seven, I
Yeah.
don't think $1 million apartment's going to go from one to two. It's not going to have much trouble doing that.
No.
So that's how I see things. And look, Australians love being close to the ocean, and we love lifestyle, and so it's just thinking very logically about it. And it's just like I said earlier, thinking about what the future actually looks like. We don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know, but you can start to see, like in somewhere like America, for example. That's why the coast of America, like the East Coast and the West Coast of America, there's properties worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Then you move into the center of America or closer to the center of America, and there's properties worth $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, and that's because these people don't control their own incomes. There's massive unemployment. Like, you've got to think about these things, and if it's happened there, it's very, very likely it's going to happen in Australia.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great takeaway because, even for me, I've got, this list of 50 to 100 things that I look for in an investment property, and that's in the third column. And in, the column before that, it's really just supply, demand, demographics. And by the sounds of it, that's what you're talking about too, is just income, demographics, where people want to live, and supply and demand. And really that's what drives property prices. So, you can take as far as you want to go and look at the little nitty gritty things. But if you, as you say, look at it as a worldly view and see what other things. I mean, Australia, we're only 200-300 years old, and if you look at
Exactly.
America and see how they've performed over time, and what are the best areas that have performed over time, it's affluence and beaches and lifestyle. So I think you're
And it's all around the world. It's the same. But then, like you just said, when you're actually going to purchase a property, there is, the one percenters that is going to be different for every suburb and property you purchase. But then it's really diving into, what the apartment or what the house has to look like. What houses outperform in these areas generally? Do they have, are they north facing, oversized bedrooms, boutique blocks,
mm,
Art Deco, ocean views? Like, there's all these little one percenters. But that comes down to, I guess, the overruling thing of scarcity. Like, it has to be a scarce asset. The more scarce it is, the better it's going to perform, essentially.
yeah, exactly. Well, that's what supply and demand drives prices. Um,
Absolutely.
so, I mean, how are you sort of managing your risks? Have you got anything sort of in plan, or insurances or anything like that that sort of makes you sleep a little bit better at night?
But buying in quality areas, I guess.
Yeah, no,
Having,
fair enough. And
um,
probably LVR, seeing how your properties have grown over that time.
yeah, exactly. And then look, even looking at it, I guess for the past couple of years, maybe 18 months, it's been a pretty flat time, or a declining time, in, I guess, the east coast of Australia.
Mm,
But then seeing how my properties have held up in that time as well gives me a boost of confidence in terms of, if the rest of Australia is seeing 10, 20, 30% price, you know, disparity from what it was at the peak.
yeah,
And I look at my properties and say, look, essentially they haven't really dropped at all. People are maybe not just paying as much as they were in the peak, but they're still paying very good price. It's,
yeah,
but obviously you've still got all your insurances in place. But look, at the end of the day, it's buying property when you can afford to buy it and you can afford to hold it for the medium to long term. And if you do that and nothing dramatically changes in your life, it's a pretty I guess, low risk asset. It's not like the
yeah.
banks can margin call you on a property and say, "I want your property's gone down 20%. I want you to, cough up this amount of money," like they do with shares and stuff.
And I think
Um,
I think that's the thing about holding great assets as well. People who know that they're sitting on a good asset, they're not going to sell it in a low market. They know that the value of the property is still going to remain the same. And even if they're in a, the one-offs that are in a bad financial situation and have to sell it in an emergency, it's still going to go. If there's demand for that property, and doesn't mean there might be no demand for the Australian property market all around, but there's still people out there that want to buy property. And so if a really good property comes up on the market, it's going to fixate all of these people who want to buy a property just to that one property, and that the demand for that property is still going to be there and sitting on a good class asset. So it's that whole thing about supply and demand again, where people just focus on these good A grade properties.
exactly. And the best thing about the market we've just been in over the past sort of 18 months is actually looking at what is selling in these markets. Because if something's selling in a tough market, essentially when it's a good market, it's going to be even in more demand. So that's what I've been really keeping an eye on is
Mm,
things that are selling and selling well in the past 18 months to 2 years, and going, okay, well if it's selling it, we're saying it's one of the toughest markets we've had in 10 years, people were saying,
mm.
then imagine what it's gonna, imagine the demand it's gonna have when things are really well.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. It just proves that there's always demand for it, and that's number one indicator.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it doesn't sound like you've made too many mistakes, but have you made any mistakes on your property journey?
Um, Look, I no, I mean you're always learning, but I guess my biggest thing's been surrounding my people that have been there and been there and done it, and they've made the mistakes. So why would I need to make them?
Yeah.
So I'm a very humble person in the terms of like I don't care if I ask for advice off people or I need help with things. I'm more than happy to ask someone and be a student than be egotistical and do it myself because I think I know everything and then essentially make a mistake that costs me a lot of money or a lot of time. So I haven't made large mistakes, but obviously you go through the journey and think, oh, I could have done that a little bit differently, or I could have said that to that agent a little bit differently, or you're always learning.
Yeah.
But as for large mistakes, no, everything's been pretty straightforward, and I've always asked for help where I've needed it.
Yeah, for sure. And if you can learn from other people's mistakes, that's the best way to learn, really.
Exactly right. Like there's no need to make mistakes in property anymore in Australia. There's just
Yeah.
no need.
Yeah. That's
Everyone
that.
everyone has made the mistake previous to you. If you are unsure on something, there is definitely someone who has been there and done it and can give you advice on it. So there's no need to take the risk or
Yeah.
you know
And it's define the mistake. Didn't you do enough research to start with? That could have been a mistake. Didn't you listen to enough or read enough to understand what makes a good property and what makes a bad property? That could have been the initial mistake.
exactly.
So, I mean, in saying that, from your mentors and everything that you've learned so far, is there, obviously Chris has got a podcast and does all that sort of stuff too. But is there anything that you'd recommend for the younger generation to sort of get their head around what they need to look out for?
Um, Look, I think everything we've just everything we've just sort of spoken about is real stuff. I think not. Look, be ambitious, but don't, I guess, set goals that are unachievable, and I guess don't buy into the pipe dream of this passive income and having this huge portfolio in a short period of time and all the rest of it because it's just not achievable unless you have this huge income and no expenses and have massive serviceability.
Mm,
Um, and it's just like get as close as you possibly can to someone who has actually been there and done it, not who says he's been there and done it, actually has proof. Um, and has shown many, 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 many years of success. And you can sort of say like, I know he's just not talking out of his ass. He's actually done it.
yeah,
So it's just being as close as possible to someone who's been there and done it, and ask where you need help. You know,
yeah, for
when
sure.
there's that much education and help out there now, there should be no needs for someone to make mistakes or be unsure on something.
Yeah, well, there's even a joke in the industry now, which is, we don't need another property book. And, although it's a laugh, it's so true. There's so many property books out there and they literally, like, I've probably read them all and they all say the same thing. And, there's so many
Uh,
other resources and podcasts and all that stuff that's out there now that you can't make a mistake unless you don't educate yourself. You really can't make a mistake.
exactly right. You have to be really silly to go and make the mistake that someone else has already made, or 10 or 20 or 30 or 100 people before you have made and have documented it.
Yeah, yeah. So apart from having a large income, what would be the final thing you'd say to our generation if they wanted to get into the property game?
I think that's the thing. You have to want to do it. I don't think property's for everyone.
Mm,
Um, but like I said, we're living in a different world now.
mm,
I think that there is definitely no need to feel obliged to go out there and buy a home because that's what our previous generations have done. If you want to go and travel and you want to experience the world and start your own business and taste different things, then do that because property can be very limiting. When you've got, I guess, mortgage over your head and you want to go and start your own business, that essentially mightn't, earn an income for a short period of time or a long period of time. There's a lot more to think about, right? You got a bank looming over you, and I think the biggest thing is like actually wanting to do it and then just committing to it. So if it's something you want to do, just commit. Have a plan, have a measurable goal in terms of you want to save X amount of dollars by X, date, make it achievable, measure it, and you can just break it down into smaller and smaller goals, like anything in life. But I definitely also think that if you don't want to do it, or don't feel like obliged that, so and so's got property, I need to do it, and so and so's done this, because look, I'm going to tell you, 99% of the time it looks a lot sexier from the outside than what it really is. And I think there's a lot more. There's a lot more options in life now than just investing and doing things. And we're living for a lot longer now. So if you want to go travel and do different things for the first 10 years of your working career, then do that, because you get to 30 or 32 or 35, whatever it is, and essentially you've still got 60 or 70 years of your life to live. So that's my take on things.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I love that, because, today's property market is so different to our parents and our grandparents. And everyone talks about the Australian property market being this, be all and end all solution to finance at retirement. But really, even starting a business could be something more exciting, and investing your money into that to get yourself ahead. There's so many more options. And, the last 10, 20, 30 years isn't going to be the same as the next 10, 20, 30 years. So there are so many other alternatives apart from property to get yourself ahead.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, Jack.
Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been actually quite an enjoyable chat. We've spoken about a lot of different things, so I've enjoyed it.
Thanks, mate. It's been great to get to know you.
Awesome, mate. Thank you.
Bye. Not only does Jack have an incredible story at the ripe age of 23, he also has some great worldly observations of our education system, insights on how the stagnation of income growth could change the price growth in blue and white collar areas, and has an in-depth understanding of how property investing has changed over the last decade. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have one or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey. Learn from the mistakes that we have made, and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing your story, you can go to jordandeyoung.com/podcasts, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe, and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.